When a predator became a partner. What if I told you that a predator, wild, untamed, and feared, became someone's most loyal hunting partner? In the snowy mountains of Colorado, a young woman stumbled upon a tiny, injured bobcat cub, abandoned in the cold. Everyone told her to leave it. Nature's way, they said, but she couldn't. And what happened next will challenge everything you believe about wild animals and the unbreakable bond between humans and nature. This isn't a story about taming a wild heart. It's about earning its trust in the most unbelievable way. Some bonds aren't born in comfort. They're forged in snow, pain, and choice. A wild cry in the storm. The storm hit harder than the forecast had warned. In the heart of Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado, the trees swayed like desperate dancers against a curtain of white. Winds howled at over 50 miles per hour, and snow slammed into the earth like a living wall. Visibility dropped to barely 20 feet. But Haley Rivers didn't turn back. At 29 years old, Haley wasn't your average wilderness guide. With her copper-red braid tucked beneath a fur-lined hood and sharp green eyes narrowed against the flurries, she moved through the elements like someone who belonged here. Slender and strong, she'd grown up on the edge of Estes Park with a rifle on her shoulder and hiking boots on her feet. The woods were her second skin. That morning, she had hiked up the ridge alone, hoping to spot migrating elk, maybe snap some photos for the wildlife column she freelanced for. But just past mile 4, she heard something that made her stop cold. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an owl. It was a cry, sharp, high-pitched, and completely out of place. Haley froze. The sound repeated. A weak, stuttering wail. Animal. But not the kind built for this kind of storm. She followed the sound off-trail, crunching through waist-deep drifts and dodging ice-laced branches that clawed at her coat. 5 minutes in, she nearly missed it, half buried in a hollow under a fallen log. Shivering and silent now lay a cub. A bobcat, not a kitten, not a feral house cat. A true wild bobcat, no more than 6 weeks old by her estimation. He was barely the size of a loaf of bread, maybe 5 pounds at best. His fur, golden with darker rosettes and frostbitten tips, was clumped with ice. His left hind leg was swollen and twisted unnaturally beneath him. For a moment, Haley just stared. Her breath caught. This was no ordinary encounter. She'd seen bobcats before, always from a distance, elusive, solitary. Born survivors. They didn't cry out unless they had no other choice. This one had cried for help. Her training screamed at her to walk away. Never interfere with wildlife unless you're a licensed rehabilitator. Let nature take its course. Predators were rarely orphans without a reason, and even then, it wasn't her place. But then the cub lifted his head. His eyes, gray-blue and glazed with pain, met hers. And something inside Haley shifted. She dropped to her knees, yanked the wool scarf from around her neck, and gently wrapped the cub. He hissed weakly, one paw twitching, but he didn't bite. She cradled him to her chest, feeling the rapid, thready beat of his heart. "You're not gonna die out here," she whispered, voice steady but breaking inside. "Not alone. Not like this." The hike back was brutal. The snow came in heavier, soaking her coat, chilling her fingers until they ached through 2 layers of gloves. The trail disappeared under white. Haley knew every tree and turn, but even she began to doubt her bearings. Yet every time she faltered, she'd feel the faintest shift from inside her jacket, the cub's tiny body pressed close, still fighting. By the time her cabin came into view, dusk had already swallowed most of the light. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney. Haley rushed through the door and slammed it behind her, letting the warmth embrace them both. She gently laid the cub on a pile of blankets near the wood stove. He didn't move, just breathed, shallow, barely. Haley sat back on her heels, snow melting off her boots, watching the animal shiver against the firelight. 100 questions swirled in her head. Had she made the right call? Was he even going to make it? And what would happen if he did? She didn't have answers, but she had a name. Ghost, she murmured, staring into those half-lidded eyes. That's what I'll call you. Because you came from nowhere, like a whisper in the storm. And that was the moment it all began. The moment a woman didn't just save a wild animal. She invited the wild into her life. But saving a life is one thing. Keeping it alive, especially when that life belongs to a predator, is something else entirely. Saving him was instinct. Keeping him alive, that was the test. The decision that changed everything. Shelter in her cabin. The storm didn't end that night. Wind battered the wooden walls of Haley's cabin like fists of ice, but inside the fire crackled steady, casting a golden glow on rough-hewn logs and books stacked in lazy piles. The place was small, just one room and a loft, but it had seen storms before. What it hadn't seen was a bobcat curled in a ball beneath a blanket on Haley's woven rug. Ghost hadn't moved much since she set him down. His breathing was shallow, more like soft huffs of air than true breaths. Haley had placed a shallow bowl of water beside him, but he ignored it. She crouched beside him, one hand hovering uncertainly. Touching a wild animal, especially a predator, was dangerous, even a cub. But he was so still. She reached out slowly, brushing her fingers along the edge of his frost-stiff fur. Warm, barely. That was something. She grabbed her emergency animal kit, the one she usually reserved for injured foxes or abandoned raccoons. Carefully, she inspected his injured leg. No open wound, thank God, but it was badly swollen. Could be a fracture, maybe worse. Haley wrapped it loosely in gauze and tucked another log onto the fire. Then she placed an old flannel shirt over his small body and sat nearby, silent. Outside, nature raged. Inside, it waited. At some point, Ghost whimpered just once and shifted toward the heat. Haley's eyes burned. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. "You're not just passing through," she whispered. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she kept watch as Ghost, the predator she rescued from the storm, began his slow drift toward life. But deep inside, she already knew. This wasn't going to be temporary. It was just beginning. You don't name something you plan to give up. Naming him Ghost. By morning, the storm had calmed. The wind dropped to whispers and the first light of dawn filtered through frost-laced window panes. Haley sat by the fire with a mug of black coffee, legs tucked beneath her, watching the small form still wrapped in flannel. He was breathing better now. Slow, steady, deliberate. His ears twitched at the sound of the kettle, and when Haley quietly rose to set down a small dish of warmed goat's milk, one of his paws shifted. That was all. But it was enough. She squatted beside him. "Still with me, huh?" His eyes fluttered open, blue-gray, alert now, but wary. There was no hiss this time, no growl. Just stillness. She reached into the milk bowl with a dropper and held it just above his nose. He sniffed once, nostrils twitching, and took a tentative lick. Then another. Then greed took over. Haley smiled, easing the dropper down until he was lapping steadily. "You're tougher than you look," she murmured. "Feral, wounded, half-frozen, and here you are." That evening, she made the call to the nearest wildlife vet, a woman named Dr. Kelly Brenner, who specialized in high-country rescues. After a brief phone consultation, Dr. Brenner agreed to see the bobcat. She was clear, though. Wild bobcats don't stay tame. The cub would need to be transferred eventually. But when Haley mentioned his leg and the storm, the vet's tone softened. "Just stabilize him. Keep him warm, hydrated, and quiet. We'll talk more once he's stronger." That night, as the fire roared, Haley whispered the name again. Ghost. He didn't react. But when she stood to fetch more firewood, he lifted his head just an inch and followed her with his eyes. Not just surviving, recognizing. And something deep in Haley's chest shifted. She was no longer helping a wild creature recover. She was becoming his person. Whether the world approved or not. Recovery would come slowly, but what neither of them expected was how survival would give way to something deeper. Connection. Trust doesn't arrive with a roar, it comes quietly. Like a paw step on snow. Not just survival. A bond forms. Days of silence. The first few days passed in stillness. Not peace, just quiet. Ghost rarely moved from his spot near the wood stove. He refused solid food, even when Haley sliced up bits of raw chicken breast. He drank the milk she warmed and tolerated her touch, but only barely. He didn't meow, didn't cry, didn't purr. He simply watched. Watched the fire. Watched the snow fall outside the windows. Watched Haley. And she, in turn, watched him. Her life slowed to match his rhythm. She stopped taking new bookings for survival tours and instead spent her time tending to the cub. She left her boots by the door and padded barefoot across wooden floors, careful not to startle him with loud movements. When she chopped firewood out back, she always returned the same way, slow, steady, quiet voice announcing her presence. Each evening, she read aloud to the room, mostly wilderness field guides or her own half-written notes on predator behavior. Ghost never responded, but she kept reading. The cadence of her voice filled the silence between them, a bridge she built without knowing if he'd ever cross it. On the fourth night, something changed. She just turned off the lantern and was heading for the loft when she heard a soft rustle behind her. Ghost had stood up. He limped a few steps forward and lay down again, closer to the hearth, closer to her. Haley didn't move. The next morning, she found him curled tighter into the flannel shirt she had laid by the stove. When she brought the dropper of milk, he didn't just drink. He nudged her hand when she paused. It wasn't a purr, but it was something. Ghost wasn't healed. Not yet. But he was staying. Not just because he needed to. Because he wanted to. And when his strength returned, so did something else. Curiosity, movement, play. And that's when everything changed. Healing begins, not when the wound closes, but when the spirit rises to play. Play turns into training. By the end of week 2, the change in Ghost was undeniable. He no longer stayed curled in one place all day. His limp remained, but he tested his strength, hobbling from the hearth to the far wall, sniffing everything in his path. Haley, careful not to overwhelm him, left soft obstacles around the cabin. A feather tied to a stick, a ball of bundled rope, even an old leather glove. At first, Ghost ignored them. But curiosity crept in. One evening, as Haley stirred stew on the stove, she heard the lightest rustle. The glove had moved. When she turned, Ghost stared back at her, paw still resting on it. They didn't speak, but something passed between them. An invitation. From that moment on, play became routine. Haley carved a small jungle gym of pine branches and climbing planks in the corner of the cabin. Ghost used it daily, cautiously, then with confidence. She designed scent puzzles from old mason jars filled with small game meat hidden behind lids and cloth. Ghost learned quickly, pawing, sniffing, problem-solving. It was instinct, but it was also partnership. He watched her closely, studying how she moved. When she crouched low in the snow outside, scanning the tree line for signs of elk, he mirrored her posture. When she tapped twice on the window frame, he responded by freezing mid-step, ears perked. It wasn't coincidence. Ghost wasn't just recovering. He was adapting. The wild in him was still there, sharp and present. But something else was blooming. Haley noticed it most when she'd walk the ridge trail. He'd follow, not always at her heel, but never far. No leash, no command, just a silent understanding. She was no longer just his rescuer. She was his person, and he was her shadow. But in a world that feared what it didn't understand, shadows like Ghost weren't seen as miracles. They were seen as threats. What the world fears, it often tries to destroy, especially when it doesn't understand. Whispers in the town. A dangerous pet. Estes Park wasn't a big town, but it was the kind where secrets didn't stay secrets for long. At first, it was just a few questions at the general store. "You seen Haley lately? She's still up there in that cabin. Was that a lynx I saw with her on the trail?" It was late January when the rumors started spreading beyond whispers. A hunter swore he'd seen a wildcat walking beside a redhead like a dog. Another claimed there'd been sightings near the old ranger trail, too close to hiking routes, too close to families. Someone called wildlife control. Then came the knock. Haley stood in the doorway of her cabin, her cheeks flushed from chopping wood, when she opened it to find two rangers and a local game warden on her porch. They weren't unfriendly. Not yet. "Haley Rivers?" the older one asked, glancing past her shoulder. She nodded. "Is there a problem?" "We've had some reports about a bobcat." Haley didn't deny it. She stepped aside and motioned them in. "His name is Ghost." Ghost, to his credit, stayed in the far corner of the room, crouched on his perch of pine logs, eyes alert but not hostile. He didn't hiss. He didn't move. He simply watched. The younger ranger blinked. "He's bigger than I expected." "Almost 6 months now," Haley replied, her voice calm but guarded. "He's healed. Eats on his own. Still limps in the cold, but he's healthy." The warden raised a brow. "You understand he's classified as a wild animal, correct?" "I do, and I didn't plan on keeping him." She paused. "I rescued him in the storm. There was no time to wait for permits. I've already spoken with Dr. Brenner. I have documentation of everything. His feeding, his recovery, even behavior logs." The warden folded his arms. "This isn't a dog, Haley. If he attacks someone, no amount of paperwork will save you, or him." That night, after they left, Haley sat in silence. Ghost climbed down from his perch and curled at her feet. She looked down at him. "They don't understand, do they?" He blinked slowly. No fear, no threat, just presence. Still, the pressure grew. A week later, an anonymous report claimed Ghost had been seen near a chicken coop. No proof, no feathers, just suspicion. The town meeting that followed was tense. A few supported her. Old neighbors who knew Haley's heart, knew her work with rescue animals. But more feared what Ghost might become. "A predator is still a predator," one man shouted. "It's only a matter of time." Haley walked out of that meeting with her jaw clenched and her mind made up. She started a blog that night. Ghost on the Ridge. Photos, videos, documentation. Not sensationalism, just truth. She showed how Ghost moved with her through the trees, how he learned her voice, how he stopped when she stopped. And slowly, quietly, the internet responded. Messages from wildlife lovers, veterinarians, photographers. "Thank you for showing the world what's possible." But for every kind message came 10 more warnings. "You're crazy. He'll turn on you. Put him down before someone gets hurt." Haley knew the world didn't deal well with blurred lines. Ghost wasn't tame. But he wasn't dangerous either. He was something in between, something the world hadn't seen before. And the choice she faced now wasn't just about keeping him. It was about defending who he'd become, and who he allowed her to be. She could protect him inside the cabin. But one day, he crossed the line into the trees alone. And when he came back, he wasn't the same. The moment he brought home his first kill, I knew. He wasn't mine anymore. A hunter's heart, Ghost's first kill. March rolled in with sunlit mornings and melting snow, but also with something new in Ghost's eyes. Distance. Not avoidance, not fear, but a pull, a call. The call of the wild. Haley noticed it first in the way he watched the tree line. Every morning, Ghost would climb to the window ledge and stare for hours. His body tensed with anticipation, ears pivoting toward distant bird calls, tail flicking with subtle frustration. Then, one morning, he was gone. The cabin door hadn't been open for long. She'd only stepped out to check the smoke vent. But when she returned, Ghost had vanished. No sound, no trail. Haley's heart dropped. She grabbed her boots, her jacket, her binoculars. But he didn't go far. 2 hours later, she found him 50 yards from the cabin, crouched low beneath a thicket of brush. His body was still, every muscle poised, and in front of him, unaware, a snowshoe hare twitched its nose in the morning sun. Haley froze, breath caught. Then came the pounce, silent, surgical. It was over in seconds. Ghost lifted his head, fur bristled and smeared faintly with blood, the hair limp between his teeth. He saw her watching. He didn't flinch. Instead, he walked toward her with slow, proud steps, as if showing a gift. Haley knelt as he approached. He dropped the hair at her feet. She looked down at the offering, still warm, life not long gone, and felt her throat tighten. This wasn't a pet. This was a predator, a wild heart in its rightful rhythm. She reached out and touched the top of his head. "Good boy," she whispered, though her voice trembled. Later that evening, as Ghost slept beneath the hearth, belly full, Haley stared into the fire. This was the beginning of a shift. Not away from her, but towards something larger. The woods were calling him home. But would he still choose to return? The answer came days later, when they ventured into the wild together. And the bobcat became more than just a hunter. He became her partner. Some partnerships aren't trained. They're chosen silently, step by step through the snow. The hunt, together. The sun crested over the ridge, casting long amber streaks across the frozen earth as Haley adjusted the strap on her hunting bow. She moved with practiced precision, boots quiet, breath controlled. It was a solo hike like dozens before it, but this time she wasn't alone. Ghost padded silently at her side, paws barely making a sound on the frost-hardened trail. His body was low, his movements fluid. They hadn't planned it. He had simply followed her that morning as she slung her pack over her shoulder and stepped into the woods. That first mile was cautious. Haley expected him to break off, distracted by a scent or a rustle. But he didn't. He stuck close, sometimes a few feet ahead, sometimes right behind, moving as though tethered to her heartbeat. When they reached a rocky outcrop overlooking the meadow, she crouched low and scanned for signs of wild turkey. Ghost mirrored her exactly. He didn't make a sound. He didn't have to. One slow blink, a twitch of the tail, a shift of the ears, and she knew. There was movement. Below them, 3 turkeys scratched at the thawing soil. Haley froze. Ghost's ears perked, but he didn't pounce. He waited. They both waited. Haley drew an arrow, slow and smooth. A breath in, a release. The arrow flew. The closest turkey collapsed in a flurry of feathers. Ghost didn't leap. He simply glanced at her, then at the kill. Then back at her as if to say, "You lead. I follow." It became their rhythm. Over the next weeks, they hunted together more often. Ghost didn't just observe. He participated. He flushed rabbits from thickets without attacking. He guided Haley with body language sharper than words. She began trusting him more than her instincts. He never wandered far, never struck without permission. They weren't predator and prey. They were something else, allies, not by force, but by choice. And in those silent mornings with snow crunching beneath their steps and pine shadows stretching around them, Haley no longer felt like a human rescuing a wild animal. She felt like a partner walking beside one. But peace in the wild doesn't last forever. And when danger came, not from the forest but from man, it came without warning. The wild is honest. It's men you have to fear. The unseen threat, danger arrives. Spring came early that year. The snow melted into rushing creeks. Elk returned to the high valleys. And Haley felt a rhythm forming, one of quiet purpose. Ghost still disappeared some mornings, roaming on his own, but always returned by dusk, slipping silently onto the porch like a shadow that had never left. But not everyone welcomed his presence. Trouble started the way trouble always does, in whispers. One of Haley's neighbors, a rancher named Clay Billings, came knocking with fire in his eyes. He stood on her porch, arms crossed over his denim jacket, his voice hard. "Something killed 2 of my hens and left nothing but feathers. No prints, no signs, just blood." Haley blinked, confused. "You think it was Ghost?" "I know it was a cat," he snapped, "and yours is the only one within 10 miles. He doesn't hunt near homes. He never goes close to livestock. I trained—" Clay cut her off. "You can't train instinct out of a predator, Haley. That thing's dangerous." That night, Haley sat on her porch long after Ghost had fallen asleep beside the hearth, her heart pounding. She knew him, knew every flick of his ears, every pause in his gait. He was careful, controlled. But fear doesn't need proof. 2 days later, she found the trap. It was barely 30 yards off her trail, hidden beneath leaves and baited with raw meat. A steel-jawed snare, illegal on public land. Ghost hadn't triggered it, not yet. Her stomach twisted. That afternoon, she reported it to the ranger station, but there was no evidence tying it to anyone. "Could be some out-of-town trapper," they said. "Happens more than you'd think." Haley knew better. She doubled back her trails, changed her hiking times, kept Ghost closer. But wild creatures roam, and one dusk, he didn't come back. Haley waited until midnight, pacing the cabin, calling softly into the woods. Nothing. No paw prints, no rustle. Just a long, agonizing silence. At dawn, she grabbed her rifle, her gear, and her resolve. She tracked him for 2 miles, heart in her throat. At first, she found broken brush, then streaks of blood. Then the scream. It wasn't human. It wasn't cat. It was something caught between rage and agony, echoing through the trees like a ghost on fire. She found him near a granite ledge, half-curled, snarling weakly, his left foreleg crushed in a trap. Blood stained the dirt around him, his golden coat matted. His eyes, glassy but still defiant, locked onto her as she approached. "Ghost!" she whispered, lowering her weapon and falling to her knees. He didn't growl. He didn't resist. He just let out a low whimper, half pain, half relief. Haley's hands shook as she worked. She wrapped his leg in a torn piece of her undershirt, secured it with her belt. Every time the trap groaned beneath her wrenching hands, he flinched, but never tried to bite. When it finally gave way with a sickening snap, she lifted him into her arms, 30 pounds of wild muscle gone limp with exhaustion. The trek back to the cabin took over 2 hours. Her legs burned, her arms ached, her breath came in ragged gasps. But she didn't stop. Not once. Back home, she laid him gently on the rug, built up the fire, and called Dr. Brenner. The vet arrived in under an hour. "He's lucky," she said grimly. "The leg's not broken, just mangled. Deep tissue damage. He'll heal, though, if he stays off it." Haley nodded, voice hoarse. "He'll stay. I'll make sure of it." That night, She sat beside him like she had months ago when he was just a half-dead cub. Only now, the stakes were different. He wasn't just an animal. He was a target. And so was she. Healing would take time, but scars tell stories the world tries to silence. And when Ghost rose again, the wild would remember who he was. He came into my life broken, but this time, it was me who was shattered. Bleeding Snow, the rescue, finding him. The silence in the forest after a cry like that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like the world holding its breath. As Haley carried Ghost down the mountainside, she felt every heartbeat between them, weak, irregular, and terrifyingly slow. His blood soaked through her jacket, his breath hot against her chest, but his eyes never left hers. "You stay with me," she whispered again and again. "Don't you dare leave now." The trail blurred under her boots. Pine branches slapped at her face. Her legs trembled beneath the weight, not just of the bobcat, but of memory, of the first time she found him half frozen under that log, of every step that led to this one. By the time she reached the cabin, her muscles were burning, her breath ragged. She burst through the door and laid him on the same rug where he'd once learned to trust her. This time, there was no time to wait. She wrapped the wound tighter, elevated the leg with a pillow, and checked his gums, pale, but responsive. Still alive, barely. She made the call to Dr. Brenner with shaking hands. Her voice cracked as she explained what had happened. The vet didn't waste time. She arrived with a medical kit in tow, her truck tires crunching across the gravel path. Inside the cabin, she knelt beside Ghost and assessed the damage. Her eyes were grim. "It's not clean," she muttered. "Jagged metal. Deep. But he's strong. That's the only thing on his side right now." Haley crouched nearby, silent, watching. When Dr. Brenner started cleaning the wound, Ghost let out a sharp, guttural sound, pain slicing through his throat. But he didn't lash out. He didn't run. He looked to Haley, trusting her even through the agony. That look said more than any scream. He knew she had come, and that was enough. But survival would come at a cost. And some wounds don't just scar the skin. They etch themselves into the soul. The wild can wound you, but it's people who make you bleed longer, fighting for his life again. Ghost survived the night, but barely. His breathing stayed shallow, and he didn't eat for 2 full days. Haley stayed by his side, spooning warm broth into a dropper, whispering words into the silence, even when she wasn't sure he could hear them. "You're not going out like this, Ghost. Not after everything we've been through." Dr. Brenner came every morning to check on him. She brought stronger antibiotics, cleaned the wound, and eventually inserted a drip line for fluids. The worst fear, amputation, loomed over their heads like a storm cloud. "He's not just a wildcat," Brenner said softly, kneeling beside the fire. "He's bonded. I've never seen anything like it." Haley didn't respond. Her voice had hardened. Not from lack of emotion, but from too much of it. The news spread fast. Whispers turned to calls. Animal control phoned twice. One ranger drove up to check on her license. Clay Billings stood at the edge of her driveway one morning and stared up at the house, arms crossed. Haley watched from the window, one hand resting on Ghost's side. She didn't blink. Ghost began to stir again on the 5th day. Just a flick of the tail, then a blink, then, finally, a growl, a low defensive rumble when the door creaked open too fast. Haley smiled through her tears. "That's my boy," she whispered. But something had changed in both of them. This wasn't just about healing a body anymore. It was about proving he belonged, not just in the forest, but in the space between the human world and the wild. And that space was getting smaller every day. The scars on his leg would fade in time, but the memory of cold steel in a trap, of human hands set with cruel intent, those would never leave. Not for him, not for her. Sometimes the hardest part of love is knowing when to let go, even when every part of you is screaming to hold on. Freedom means risk, but love means giving it anyway. Bound by the wild, a new understanding. The cabin grew quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This wasn't healing silence. It was the hush that follows a decision you don't want to make, but know you must. Ghost was walking again, slowly, carefully, with a stiff gait. But he was walking. His coat had grown thick again with the spring thaw, and his muscles regained strength each day. But his eyes, they had changed. They stayed longer on the horizon. They didn't linger on Haley the way they used to. And Haley felt it in her bones. He didn't belong within walls anymore. Not even hers. Late one afternoon, she knelt beside him on the porch as the sun poured gold across the valley below. Ghost sat tall beside her, his head lifting with each passing breeze like he was listening to a voice she couldn't hear. "I can't cage you, even to save you," she said softly. He didn't look at her. He didn't have to. That night she packed a satchel with supplies, dried meat, fresh water, and the scent cloth they had always used during tracking. She hiked with him into the northern ridge beyond the trails marked by men, into a quiet stretch of forest, untouched and protected. The terrain there was steep, with dense evergreens and winding brooks. A place Ghost could disappear into, without fear of people, traps, or angry neighbors. She left the satchel at the base of an old cedar. He didn't follow her back. She didn't expect him to. For days afterward, she kept watch from the porch, eyes fixed on the tree line. Some nights, she left out food. Sometimes it disappeared. Sometimes it didn't. And then, 3 weeks later, she saw him, just at the edge of the trees, watching, not coming close, not stepping forward. Just there, the same Ghost from the storm, the same eyes that had once pleaded for warmth. They stared across the space between them, wild and woman, and she felt no sadness, only gratitude. "You're free," she whispered, "but you're not forgotten." He blinked once, then turned and vanished back into the trees. That was his answer. He wouldn't live in her world anymore, but he would never truly leave it either. In time, stories would spread about the red-haired woman and the bobcat who hunted beside her. But to Haley, he was never legend. He was just Ghost. Some stories fade into myth, but some stay etched in the trees, paw print by paw print. Legends of Estes Park, the legacy. The mountains kept their secrets. But Estes Park? It had a way of turning secrets into stories. It began with children, wide-eyed and breathless, pointing into the woods during school field trips. "I saw him!" they'd shout. "The bobcat! He was watching us from the trees!" At first, the adults would laugh, but then the sightings grew. A flash of tawny fur near a trail. A hunter's motion camera catching a feline silhouette beside boot tracks. A woman in a red braid seen hiking alone. Except she wasn't. The locals started whispering again, but this time the tone had changed. They called him the Ridge Ghost. They said he was different from other wildcats. He didn't stalk. He didn't attack. He watched, protected, followed a single person. Haley never confirmed the rumors. She didn't need to. By now, she'd opened a small wildlife rehabilitation center on the outskirts of town. Not a big operation, just a few acres, a solar-powered barn, and enough space for healing. She took in foxes with broken legs, hawks with clipped wings, even a baby moose one winter. But on certain evenings after everyone had gone home, she'd sit on the edge of her property, always the same spot, facing the northern ridge. And sometimes, if the wind was still and the moon just right, she'd see the flick of a tail or the shimmer of yellow eyes reflecting in the dark. She never called out, never approached. She didn't need to. Ghost was still there, living as he was meant to. And even if no one believed her, even if he faded into legend or vanished from every trail camera, she knew the truth. She hadn't just saved a wild animal. She had been chosen by one, and that, more than the stories, more than the name, was the legacy she'd carry for the rest of her days. Lessons from a ghost in the wild. Some bonds in life aren't planned. They're stumbled upon in moments of vulnerability, forged in trust and tempered by sacrifice. Haley didn't set out to raise a predator. She simply chose compassion in a moment when it mattered most. And in return, she discovered that love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes, it's about knowing when to let go and trusting that what's real will find its way back to you. Ghost's story teaches us this. You don't have to tame something to love it. You just have to meet it where it is and respect what it was born to be. At Paw Prints and Stories, we believe every animal carries a lesson, and every true connection leaves a mark on the heart. If this story moved you, reflect on your own wild bonds, those rare, raw connections that defy logic, yet stay with you forever. Would you fight for them? Would you set them free? Join our journey by subscribing to Paw Prints and Stories, where every tale begins with a step into the unknown.